The grocery bag sat perfectly arranged in the metal cart, each item placed with the care of someone who understood that details mattered. Bread on top so it wouldn't get crushed. Eggs secured so they wouldn't shift. Milk positioned where it wouldn't tip. Professional work from someone who'd been doing this job long enough to know that customers noticed everything. Charles Bronson stood third in line at Vaughn's supermarket on Melrose Avenue, watching the elderly cashier work with quiet efficiency. Tuesday afternoon, 1978, the kind of mundane errand that famous people handled like everyone else. Groceries didn't care about movie stardom. Milk cost the same, whether you were Charles Bronson or Charles Nobody. The cashier's name was Rose Gutierrez, 67 years old, widow of 43 years. Husband died in Korea, left her with 3 children and a social security check that wouldn't cover rent, let alone food and clothing and the thousand small expenses that came with raising kids alone. Rose had been working at Vaughn's for 22 years, started part-time when her youngest started school, became full-time when her oldest needed college tuition, stayed full-time when her middle child got sick and needed medical care that insurance wouldn't cover, stayed because she needed the income and because she was good at the work. She knew every product code by memory, could ring up a full cart faster than cashiers half her age, never made mistakes with change, never lost patience with difficult customers, never missed a day except when her arthritis flared up so badly she couldn't grip the scanner. Rose treated every customer like they mattered, made eye contact, said please and thank you, remembered regulars and asked about their families, the kind of service that came from understanding that dignity didn't depend on job title, that treating people well was a choice you made regardless of circumstances. The manager's name was Derek Phillips, 29 years old, MBA from USC, 6 months on the job, company fast-track program designed to move college graduates into management positions without wasting time on learning retail from the ground up. Derek saw his position at Vaughn's as a stepping stone to corporate headquarters. District manager by 35, regional director by 40, retirement by 50 with enough stock options to never think about groceries again. Derek understood retail as numbers on spreadsheets, cost per transaction, items scanned per hour, customer satisfaction scores derived from survey data. What Derek didn't understand was the human element, the relationships between workers and customers that couldn't be quantified but determined whether a store felt welcoming or hostile. Derek had been watching Rose for weeks, timing her transactions, measuring her productivity against younger employees, calculating her value to the store based on metrics that reduced 22 years of experience to statistical averages. The problem from Derek's perspective was that Rose was slow, not careless, not incompetent, just methodical. She double-checked prices when something seemed wrong, helped customers find coupons they'd forgotten, took time to make sure elderly shoppers could handle heavy bags, the kind of service that built customer loyalty but hurt productivity numbers. Derek had been pressuring Rose to work faster, reminding her that the company valued efficiency, suggesting that maybe she was getting too old for the demands of modern retail, hinting that changes might be necessary if performance didn't improve. Rose absorbed the criticism quietly, tried to work faster, made mistakes she'd never made before, stressed about job security for the first time in 2 decades, went home exhausted, not from physical labor, but from the constant pressure to prove she still belonged. This afternoon, Derek had been watching Rose's checkout line for 20 minutes, counting seconds between transactions, measuring her against the newest cashier, a 19-year-old named Jennifer who could scan items quickly but needed help with produce codes and couldn't handle difficult customers without calling for management. Derek saw that Rose's line was moving slower than Jennifer's, saw an opportunity to make his point about efficiency versus experience. saw a chance to demonstrate modern management techniques to other employees who might be watching. Bronson observed all of this without appearing to pay attention, stood behind his shopping cart reading grocery store tabloids while actually watching the dynamics between manager and employee. The body language told the story: authority and submission, power and vulnerability. Young man with clipboard and older woman trying to keep her job. Rose was checking out a customer ahead of Bronson. Elderly man buying cat food and frozen dinners for one. She moved carefully through his items, asked if he'd found everything he needed, mentioned that cat food was on sale next week if he wanted to stock up. Derek approached Rose's register during the transaction, stood close enough to make her nervous, close enough that the customer noticed his presence, close enough to assert supervisory authority without saying anything yet. Rose finished with the elderly customer, handed him his receipt with a smile, told him to have a nice day and come back soon. Professional service delivered despite the tension of being watched and evaluated. The next customer stepped forward, young mother with two small children and a cart full of groceries, milk and bread and diapers and formula, the kind of shopping trip that required patience and understanding and the recognition that parents with small children were doing their best under difficult circumstances. Rose began scanning items. One of the children started crying. The mother tried to calm him while watching prices on the register display, worried about staying within budget, worried about holding up the line, worried about being judged for having crying children in public. Rose worked steadily through the cart, paused when she noticed the baby formula was ringing up at regular price instead of the sale price advertised on the shelf, checked her computer, saw the promotion hadn't been updated in the system. Ma'am, Rose said quietly, this formula is supposed to be on sale. Let me get the right price for you. The young mother looked relieved. Thank you. Every dollar helps. Rose started the process of correcting the price, required manager approval, required Derek to input his override code, required time and attention that Derek saw as inefficiency rather than customer service. That's when Derek decided to make his point publicly. Rose, Derek said loudly, voice designed to be heard by other customers, voice designed to demonstrate authority. How long is this going to take? Just getting the sale price, Mr. Phillips. It'll be just a moment. You should have known the promotion wasn't updated. You've been here long enough to check these things before you start ringing them up. Rose's face flushed. 22 years of experience dismissed in front of a customer who was watching the interaction with growing discomfort. The young mother tried to smile, tried to pretend she wasn't witnessing an employee being humiliated for helping her. I'm sorry, Mr. Phillips. I'll be more careful. This is exactly what we talked about, Derek continued. Efficiency, attention to detail, working smarter instead of just working longer. Derek entered his override code, corrected the price, but instead of walking away, he continued his lecture, using Rose as an example for other employees who might be listening, using her mistake as an opportunity to demonstrate modern management principles. Rose, you've been doing this job for a long time, maybe too long. Maybe it's time to consider whether you're still capable of keeping up with the demands we have here. The words hit Rose like physical blows. 67 years old, 22 years of loyal service, being told in front of customers that she was too old, too slow, too outdated for modern retail, being reduced to a productivity problem that needed solving. Rose's hands shook as she continued scanning items. The young mother watched with obvious sympathy. Other customers in line pretended not to notice but couldn't help hearing, everyone uncomfortable with the public humiliation of an elderly woman who was just trying to help. Maybe, Derek said, you should think about retirement. Make room for people who can handle the pace we need here. That's when Charles Bronson stepped forward, not dramatically, not aggressively, just moved from his position behind the cart to beside Derek, close enough that Derek had to look up to see his face, close enough that his presence changed the geometry of the conversation. Bronson didn't say anything immediately, just stood there looking at Derek with brown eyes that had seen everything and been impressed by very little, looking at him the way you might look at a broken piece of machinery that needed fixing. Derek recognized Bronson immediately. Movie star, famous face, important customer, the kind of person who could complain to corporate and be taken seriously, the kind of person whose opinion mattered more than regular customers. Mr. Bronson, Derek said, quickly shifting to customer service mode. So sorry for the delay. We'll have you checked out in just a moment. Bronson looked at Derek, then at Rose, who was trying to continue working despite the tears in her eyes, then back at Derek. This woman, Bronson said quietly, has been working here for over 20 years. Yes, sir. But we have certain standards. 22 years of showing up, 22 years of serving customers, 22 years of representing your store with dignity and professionalism. Derek nodded uncertainly, not sure where this was going, not sure if Bronson was agreeing with him or challenging him. And you just told her she's too old to do her job. Well, I was just discussing performance standards in front of customers, in front of her neighbors, in front of people who've been coming here for years, specifically because Rose takes care of them. Derek's confident demeanor started to crack, recognized that he might be in trouble. That publicly humiliating an elderly employee in front of Charles Bronson wasn't the career-building moment he'd intended. Bronson turned to Rose. Ma'am, how long have you been working here? 22 years, sir, Rose said softly. You like the work? Yes, sir, I do. You good at it? I try to be, sir. Bronson looked back at Derek. 22 years of experience, knows every customer, remembers their preferences, takes time to make sure they're treated right, and you want to replace her with someone faster. Derek opened his mouth, started to explain about productivity metrics and efficiency standards and corporate expectations, stopped when he saw the look in Bronson's eyes, the look of a man who'd worked hard jobs for hard bosses and understood the difference between leadership and bullying. Son, Bronson said, his voice quiet but carrying across the checkout area, let me tell you something about efficiency. Derek waited, other customers waited, Rose waited, everyone understanding that something important was happening. Real efficiency isn't about speed. It's about getting things right the first time. It's about treating customers so well they come back for 20 years. It's about building relationships that turn shopping into something people enjoy instead of something they endure. Bronson gestured toward Rose. This woman has been building those relationships for 2 decades. She knows things about customer service that you can't learn in business school. She understands that taking care of people is more important than hitting numbers on a spreadsheet. Derek's face had gone from confident to uncomfortable to genuinely worried, understanding that he'd made a mistake, that humiliating an experienced employee in front of customers was wrong, both morally and professionally. You want to know what's inefficient? Bronson continued, training new employees every 6 months because they quit when they realize the job is harder than it looks. Dealing with customer complaints because inexperienced cashiers make mistakes. Losing loyal customers who've been coming here for years because Rose made them feel welcome. 8 seconds, that's how long Bronson spoke. 8 seconds to completely reframe the conversation. 8 seconds to turn Derek's public criticism into a public education about real management. 8 seconds to restore Rose's dignity and question Derek's judgment. The young mother with the crying children looked at Rose with obvious gratitude. Other customers in line nodded approvingly, everyone understanding that they'd witnessed something important. an elderly worker being protected by someone who had the power to make the protection matter. Derek stood there for a moment, recognizing that he'd lost control of the situation, that his attempt to demonstrate authority had backfired completely, that Charles Bronson had just given him a master class in leadership in front of his employees and customers. "Rose," Derek said quietly, "continue with the transaction. Take whatever time you need." Rose finished checking out. The young mother corrected two more sale prices that hadn't been updated in the system, helped her load bags into her cart, took time to smile at the crying children. Professional service delivered with restored dignity. When Bronson's turn came, Rose checked him out carefully, professionally, asked if he'd found everything he needed, thanked him for shopping at Vaughn's, the same service she'd been providing for 22 years, just without the fear of being criticized for taking time to do it right. Bronson paid for his groceries, started to leave, stopped, turned back to Derek. "Son, you've got a treasure in Rose. 22 years of loyalty and experience. Most companies would kill for that kind of dedication. Don't waste it by confusing speed with quality." Derek nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand." Bronson left. Derek returned to his office. Rose continued working, but something had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by the understanding that someone had stood up for her. Someone had recognized her value. Someone had reminded management that employees were human beings deserving of respect. 3 weeks later, Derek was transferred to another store. Company cited customer complaints and employee morale issues. Rose received a commendation for 22 years of excellent service. Corporate sent a letter thanking her for her dedication and professionalism. Rose worked at Vaughn's for another 8 years, trained dozens of new cashiers, taught them not just how to scan items quickly, but how to treat customers with dignity, how to build relationships that lasted decades, how to understand that retail was about people, not just products. When Rose finally retired at 75, her last day became a celebration. Customers brought flowers, coworkers shared memories, management praised her as an example of what dedicated service looked like. The young mother with crying children, now 8 years older, brought her school-age kids to say goodbye to the cashier who'd always been kind to them. Derek eventually became a district manager, but he never forgot the lesson Charles Bronson taught him in 8 seconds about the difference between managing people and leading them, about understanding that experience has value that can't be measured in spreadsheets, about treating employees with dignity regardless of their age or position. Charles Bronson never spoke about that afternoon, never mentioned it in interviews, never used it to promote himself as someone who stood up for working people. Just another moment where he chose to use his authority to protect someone who needed protection. 8 seconds to teach 3 lessons. That experience matters more than speed. That dignity doesn't have an expiration date. That real leadership protects people instead of humiliating them. 8 seconds that rippled forward through Rose's remaining 8 years of work, through Derek's career as a manager who learned to value people over metrics, through the understanding that standing up for others is sometimes as simple as speaking truth to power. Rose lived to be 83, told the story of Charles Bronson's intervention to her grandchildren, not as a celebrity encounter, but as an example of what happens when good people refuse to let bad behavior go unchallenged. 8 seconds that proved kindness is a choice, respect is a decision, and sometimes all it takes to change someone's life is the willingness to say what everyone else is thinking but afraid to voice. That's what real strength looks like. Not the ability to dominate others, but the wisdom to protect those who need protection. 8 seconds in a grocery store, 8 seconds that changed everything.